Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Friday everybody. Just a piece of housekeeping. In my office today I'm babysitting a young man who's one of my colleagues' boys, so you may hear his voice pop up on occasion. Please feel free to ignore that. It shouldn't be too disruptive. 你几岁？你多大？我8岁。8岁是吧？He's 8 years old. First up, 2 economic-related developments which we need to cover. The Chinese yuan continues to decline against the US dollar at a rate faster than many commentators anticipated, and it's increasingly clear that the central bank is trying to slow this decline. Yesterday, Beijing raised the macro-prudential parameter for financial institutions and non-financial businesses cross-border financing from 1.25 to 1.5. People's Bank of China. 哎，咋呢？我以为你要做那个作业。我在读东西。啊，这是什么呀？信。哦，谢谢。我正在录东西。哦，拜拜。啊，不好意思，我不要打扰你。做作业是吧？啊。你加油。要学英文对吧？那你加油。学会一个外语不是一个一朝一夕的事情。好，谢谢。Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that adjusting the parameter can guide market expectations by signaling that the yuan's fluctuations have exceeded the People's Bank of China's tolerance, and that the central bank may intervene further if volatility remains high. Zhang at the Center for International Finance Studies of the Central University of Finance and Economics, in a note published yesterday, warns, however, that the tool has a limited scope of influence. Quote, as businesses, cross-border financing affects only part of the yuan's supply and demand, end quote, adding that when the parameter is raised, the tool's effect depends on companies' willingness to borrow more from overseas. UK-based Reuters, in an exclusive report published yesterday, reports, citing unnamed sources, that China's major state-owned banks were seen selling dollars to buy yuan in the offshore spot market in early Asian trades on yesterday. One source told the outlet that such state bank dollar selling was meant to slow the pace of yuan declines. With this news, finance professor Michael Pettis of Peking University tweeted that the People's Bank of China moves are, quote, intervention by another name, end quote. The RMB continues to flirt with the $1 to 7.2 yuan level. The next economic development we need to cover is that multiple outlets are now reporting that the central government appears about to announce measures to make it easier for people to qualify as a first-time home buyer in first-tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai and Shenzhen, significantly lowering down payment requirements and mortgage costs in these cities. This would be a significant move and yet another sign of how concerned policymakers are that the property market refuses to recover, or at the very least stabilize. US financial media outlet Bloomberg writes yesterday, citing unnamed sources, that regulators are weighing scrapping rules that disqualify people who have ever had a mortgage, even if fully repaid, from being considered a first-time home buyer in major cities. Home buyers with a mortgage record who don't own a property are still subject to the higher down payment and more restrictive borrowing limits applied to those buying a second home. The plans are under discussion and have yet to be approved, the sources tell the outlet. We have seen for months now local governments across the country loosening restrictions to increase demand for housing. However, these measures almost always do not apply to first-tier cities, where the market remains relatively hot and prices are the highest. The fear was always that the first-tier markets were already too systemically risky. Quote, for years, China has sought to suppress real estate demand in the biggest cities by treating buyers with previous mortgages as second-time purchasers, substantially raising down payment thresholds and increasing borrowing costs in the capital of Beijing. A second-time buyer needs to come up with a down payment of as much as 80% of the property's value. The down payment is just 40% for first-time buyers." End quote. Next up, after meetings with People's Republic of China Defense Minister Li and top diplomat Wang Yi, former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger met with General Secretary Xi Jinping himself. We remember that the elder statesman, instrumental in the Nixon-era establishment of US-PRC relations, has been in Beijing this week in a non-official capacity, in his words, to work towards reducing the risk of war between China and the US. Xi Jinping met with Kissinger at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing on Thursday. During the meeting, Xi noted that Kissinger has recently celebrated his 100th birthday and has paid more than 100 visits to China over the years. Quote, "These two 100s give this visit special significance," end quote, the General Secretary said. He added, quote, "52 years ago, when China and the United States were at a crucial inflection point, Chairman Mao Zedong, Premier Zhou Enlai, President Richard Nixon, and Dr. Kissinger, with their extraordinary strategic vision, made the right decision for China-US cooperation and launched the process of normalizing the China-US relationship. The decision delivered benefits to the two countries and changed the world. We never forget our old friends, nor your historic contributions to promoting the growth of China-US relations and enhancing friendship between the two peoples. China and the United States relations will forever be linked to the name Kissinger. I express my deep respect to you." End quote. Very high praise indeed. There's been a lot of state media coverage of the trip. State-run Global Times called Kissinger a, quote, "rational voice coming out of the US strategic and academic spheres about the US-China relations," end quote, in otherwise anti-China chorus in the United States, end quote. After the formal meeting, she hosted Kissinger for a luncheon. Beijing went all out for this visit. The US State Department has stressed this week that Kissinger is in China as a private citizen, but that he may brief US officials of his conversations when he returns. It is hoped that through these back-channel meetings, Kissinger may be able to convince the PRC to re-establish military-to-military communication channels with the United States, critical guardrails to prevent military escalations after an incident. This has been the goal of the White House this year, which so far has been unsuccessful. Apart from this, however, US and Chinese commentators alike do not expect much else outside of warm rhetoric to come out of this Kissinger trip. For example, a special state-run Beijing Daily article writes today, quote, "Whether Kissinger came of his own accord or as a firefighter for the Biden administration, his visit will have limited impact on the substantial improvement of US-China relations. The root cause of the difficulties in US-China relations lies in the serious deviation in the US's understanding and positioning of China, leading to a series of wrong actions towards China." End quote. As is typically the case, there is no self-reflection within the article. Next up, China's growth model needs to change, says a prominent economist at one of China's top universities. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. It's just me making these episodes every day. It's a lot of work, but your guys' support is a huge source of motivation. Subscribing and sharing is a huge help as well, and for those who can go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Finally for today, I wanted to end the video by looking at a speech recently delivered by the Dean of the School of Economics and the Director of the Research Institute of Chinese Economy at China's prestigious Fudan University in Shanghai, Professor Zhang. Zhang made the comments at the 2023 NetEase Annual Economist Conference Summer Forum. The speech is long, but what is notable is that Zhang touches on salient issues related to China's growth model, among other topics, issues which we on China Update have been following and discussing for some time. Pekingnology has helpfully translated the speech into English, so viewers can go read the whole thing on their website if they want. For us here now, let's observe some of his main points related to China's growth model, specifically Many of these ideas will be very familiar to regular China Update viewers. Now quoting Professor Zhang directly. During the period from the late 1980s to 2008, China's economic growth model exhibited characteristics of the East Asian model, while also possessing its own uniqueness. After entering the mid-1990s, local governments gradually evolved into the main drivers of the economic catch-up strategy. Governments carried out large-scale public capital expenditures to stimulate economic growth, relying on land leasing for financing. This model became more prominent after the implementation of policies to expand domestic demand following 2008. However, by around 2010, some core data indicated that the effectiveness of this model began to significantly decline. China aspired to achieve a transformation in its economic model, but over the past decade, China has been entangled and wavering between the old and the new economic models. As an aside, we note that it's significant that high-profile Chinese commentators are now frankly acknowledging this so publicly. We continue to directly quote Professor Zhang. The transition of economic models is the biggest challenge faced after the success of East Asian economies, and not all economies can achieve successful transformation. China should reflect on why there is currently a weakening of consumer purchasing power. Even in the face of the impact of the pandemic, all the policy assistance have been provided to businesses with little consideration for households. Within the budget expenditure structure of both the central and local governments, there are few projects aimed at providing subsidies and welfare support to families. Currently, China has the highest savings rate in the world, but it doesn't mean that the Chinese people are wealthy. A high savings rate actually indicates that we are not that wealthy. Due to relatively low incomes and a higher estimation of future expenses, individuals allocate a portion of their income as precautionary savings. In reality, many households are overly cautious and tend to overestimate future financial pressures. This naturally affects current consumption, and if China doesn't fundamentally change the situation, this will continue to persist. Consumption and welfare levels of households ultimately contribute to maintaining long-term economic development momentum. Here ends the direct quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Once again, my apologies for the young man who is sharing my office with me here today. Hopefully it was not too distracting. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a wonderful Friday. Have a great weekend. There should be a regular episode tomorrow on Saturday. And so, hopefully, if everything goes to plan, I will see you all tomorrow.